Hello and welcome to Racing News 365 answers your fan questions following last weekend's eventful Dutch Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and joining me to help answer your questions is the awesome Joe. That is 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Cool, and the man, the myth, the almighty legend, that is lead editor Ian Parks. And actually, Ian, it's a rarity to have you in these videos because normally we do the fan questions whilst you're traveling to an airport or on a flight somewhere back. Obviously, you're heading out to Monza on Wednesday, so a good chance you won't be in next week's fan questions video. Probably back to be me and Sam. You'll do your best, as you always do. But it's fair to say that only time will tell. But it's fair to say that after 4 weeks of no F1 with the summer break, Zandvoort delivered, well, about a season's worth of action. It's got to be said.
Not bad, was it? It was not bad. It was. We were wondering, though, weren't we? Because I know we were chatting in our Slack channel that we use for our work stuff when we're going across a Grand Prix weekend and things like that. And we were starting to get a bit bored after about 20 laps, it had to be said, because it did look like as if there was going to be not much taking place. And then all of a sudden, Lewis Hamilton livened things up. Thank you very much, Lewis. Not in the way that he really would have wanted to with his accident. But nevertheless, that did seem to be the trigger for everything else that unfolded afterwards. So we did have plenty of action, plenty to discuss, as we did on the podcast. If you've not listened to that yet, folks, please do have a good listen to that on all your good podcast channels, or even on our YouTube video channel. Catch us there on that. But yes, overall, it was a pretty busy run, and I enjoyed it. So that means there's going to be a lot now coming out of that Grand Prix going into this weekend's race at Monza.
And as always, we have randomly selected 5 questions sent in from you guys, the fans. So thank you very much, as always, and apologies if your question has not been randomly selected. Better luck next week. First question, and Sam will give this one to you, and it comes from Melissa. Melissa has said, "Hi, I really enjoy listening to your podcast. It's always interesting." Thank you, Melissa. I also have a question myself. How do teams decide who gets to stand on the podium following a race win? I'm curious.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that lovely comment. It means a lot to us to hear from fans or people who watch the podcast for what your experience is of it. And it's a very good question because it's something that you wouldn't immediately think of or notice over a Grand Prix weekend. So generally, it will be the team principal who makes a recommendation or says to a member of staff, would you like to represent us on the podium this weekend? There will be maybe some slightly different ways of doing it in other teams where, maybe some of the senior leadership team have discuss it amongst themselves to make the decision. But generally, it is the team principal. Obviously, this weekend, we saw Laura Bowden at McLaren step up onto the podium for the team. She is the chief financial officer for McLaren. And what was really promising or what enjoyable about that was seeing some female representation on the podium this weekend as well. So thank you very much for the question. And that's generally how they decide who represents the team.
Very well answered. Moving on to the next question, and it comes from Hadjar Fanat 445. Ian, this one comes to you, and it's surrounding probably the most comical moment of the Grand Prix. How on earth did Charles Leclerc get hold of a phone so quickly when he was on the dunes on the inside of turn 3 following his crash?
I love the name, by the way. Do you think this person is an Isack Hadjar fan by any chance?
What gives it away?
Just slight clue. Thank you ever so much. Anyway, Hadjar Fanat, what were the numbers?
445.
445. That means there's 444 other Hadjar Fanats previously, you can only assume. But anyway, I digress. Lovely question. And yes, it was an amazing moment, wasn't it? Because obviously, poor old Charles, he'd had that really unfortunate coming together with Kimi Antonelli, not of his own making. Kimi just obviously trying to make a bold move at the lower part of the banking, understeered into Charles. Charles crashed into the barrier on the outside, where literally 30 laps earlier, Lewis Hamilton had also hit that same barrier and, of course, completely destroyed poor old Charles' Ferrari. That was him out of the race. Charles, obviously, in a difficult part to the track to try and get back to the paddock. We saw him reminisce, almost deck chair-like, of Fernando Alonso from a few years back when old Fernando crashed out and he was sat in that deck chair. There was Charles sitting on top of that sandbank. And yeah, we saw him with a mobile phone. It was like, where has he got this from? Surely he hasn't got a mobile phone in his race suit, or quite naturally, there's not going to be a mobile phone in his car. So I contacted Ferrari because on the back of this question, funnily enough, because I myself wanted to know. It was a good question. And quite simply, Charles knew a photographer who was stationed at that particular part of the circuit, and actually a great part of the circuit to get action shots. And I'm sure that photographer was a very busy boy that day, bearing in mind what happened with Lewis and Charles at that particular point. So Charles knew the photographer. He asked if he could borrow the mobile phone from this photographer. And the photographer, of course, did him a favour, gave Charles the mobile phone. And that's why we saw those great shots on his mobile, sitting on a sandbank, watching the rest of the race unfold.
So the next question to ask then is, what was he doing on the phone? Does he have all the Ferrari numbers just memorised into his brain? I was not expecting that. That's
Maybe
not...
he's calling his girlfriend. Could have been calling his girlfriend. Who knows?
Who was he on the phone to?
Fun question for you guys.
Well, do you want me to go back to Ferrari? Maybe they can ask for it.
Yeah, actually, we have a follow-up on this one, believe it or not. There is a, now former F2 driver who used to race with a phone in the cockpit of their car, which obviously is highly unconventional. Do you know who it is and illegal. Why? There's a special reason why this was allowed.
Oh, yeah. It's something health related, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's got to be health related.
Or like blood pressure or something. Or,
It's Christian
like
Mansell,
glucose levels,
who has diabetes. So he has a phone that is in his cockpit that basically is hooked up to various things, so that if his blood sugar level drops too low, it kind of alerts and it kind of realizes, and that's how they can kind of keep him safe when he's in the car.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
That's wow. Cool. That's fascinating stuff. Thanks for that input there. So that's brilliant. That's, right. That's added to this.
And that has all come from a very nice question from Hadjar Fans 445. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next question. And it comes from Open Das. What did you make of Carlos Sainz's penalty? Open Das also says, I didn't understand it at all. And I'll be honest, I don't really understand it either. Of course, for those who don't know, Carlos Sainz received a 10-second time penalty for being deemed to have caused a collision with Liam Lawson. Both drivers sustained a puncture. Carlos also had to have a front wing change, ruined both of their races, basically. However, the bizarre thing about this was Carlos was actually on the outside of Liam at turn 1 where it happened, and it appeared that Liam had a bit of a snap, maybe a bit of oversteer, which kind of sent him into Carlos's path. It's fair to say, Ian, and obviously give your opinion on this matter based on the question, but Carlos wasn't happy.
That's an understatement. He did actually keep his emotions quite in check when he was answering all the questions post-incident, post-race about it. His words weren't inflammatory, he wasn't angry, he wasn't furious or anything like that. But nevertheless, he was very, very unhappy with the decision taken by the stewards. Now, just to give you some idea, the basic reasoning of the stewards is that the front axle of Carlos's Williams was not ahead of the front axle of Liam's Racing Balls machinery at the apex of turn 1. And obviously Sainz then carried on, attempted to stay on the outside of Liam. And that, of course, is when the collision occurred, because Liam basically came back across on Carlos to take the racing line through to the very short turn 2. So that basically gives you the basics as to why the penalty was applied. Quite simply, the stewards going by the letter of the regulations with regard to the various positioning of the axles of each of the two cars at the apex of this particular corner. This particular corner is quite unusual because it's actually quite a loop. It's not a 90 degree. It's not a sharp left-hander or sharp right-hander. It's quite a sweeping kind of loop. And we've seen many drivers go side by side through that particular corner, Dutch Grand Prix, over the past few years. Carlos's reasoning was, bearing in mind that is the case, given it's that type of corner, bearing in mind we have seen wheel-to-wheel action and nothing really take place on those particular occasions. Unfortunately, this one did lend itself to a collision. Why was he punished? Why? He couldn't understand it. He felt it was a dangerous precedent set with regard to this particular type of incident for himself, for F1, for motorsport in general. And he was quite pointed. We heard his radio remarks, of course, described Liam as stupid. So he was quite inflamed in the cockpit at the time. Post-race, as I say, he was a little bit more considered. Felt Liam was stupid. He should something that he'd done in the past. And he should be basically a bit more careful. Liam quite obviously had his say once he'd learned of Carlos's comments. Was particularly unhappy that Carlos didn't come to him directly post-race and instead aired all his thoughts through the media, as Carlos did. But yes, it's raised quite a little bone of contention with Carlos in particular. As I say, he wanted to go and see the stewards quite as soon as possible after the race, was told that he couldn't. He was not happy with that either, but in all fairness, bearing in mind you and I, Nick, were sitting waiting around for all those stewards' verdicts for about 4 hours post-race last night. You can quite understand why Carlos didn't get to see the stewards when all these verdicts and documents were coming out from them. So I'm sure he will get to have that discussion at some stage ahead of this weekend's Italian Grand Prix, because he was not happy in that respect. So there's the bottom line. That's the outlier, the details of the case, shall we say.
But did you agree with it? That's the question here. What was your personal opinion?
No,
I don't disagree.
I completely disagree with it, but I get that. Sorry, Sam, I'll just give my thoughts and then obviously I'll let you speak. Sorry, pal. No, I don't. When you consider the nature of the incident, okay, they both copped a puncture. Yes. Carlos to his front right, Liam to his rear left. So it's not as if Carlos got away with something. So it's not as if he hit Liam, put Liam to the back of the pack whilst he carried on fighting for points. So you got to throw that into the equation as well, that both drivers were penalised to a certain extent. And the other thing for me is when you consider that if that was a 10-second penalty, when you consider how Kimi Antonelli wiped out Charles Leclerc 20-odd laps later, and he only gets a 10-second penalty for that, when that was a proper hit, and that has cost an awful amount of money to repair that Ferrari. The damage that it sustained hitting that barrier, it's that balance, isn't it? It's, and this is a lot of the things that the drivers go through with these regulations, that sometimes they're just not in proportion. But as I say, the stewards applied the letter of the law on this particular occasion. Nothing more they could do.
And I think that final point is the really interesting bit in some ways for me, that it is the letter of the law. We live in an F1 where you can crowd out on the exit of a corner, and you're within your right to do that, which is, you could argue that's what Liam did to a certain extent. Where was Carlos meant to go? Like, there was no more track for him. So that's why I think it's particularly harsh. And also you look at the fact that you could make an argument that Liam didn't have full control because he did have that snap. So there's these things that kind of, you could argue could have mitigated it down to 5 seconds, which maybe would have been a fairer penalty, especially when you then consider it, against Kimi Antonelli's as well. So yeah, it's very difficult, I think, to look at that and go, yeah, that's completely fine. Especially when you look at Lando and Max's, or Lando's overtake on Max at the same corner, a very similar overtake, had Carlos been able to put it off. They kept it clean. They showed that you can do it. So I think to say it was wholly Carlos's fault is quite harsh, even if, by the letter of the law, it was his, kind of his fault by being there where he shouldn't have been.
Yeah, that's the bit that I didn't add. So just to add, Nick, that obviously in the steward's document, it does say that Carlos was, to use their wording, wholly or predominantly to blame. So they saw him as the key person at fault. It wasn't a 50-50 kind of incident where neither driver was at fault on this occasion. Liam, for his part, with regard to his reaction to Carlos's comments, turned around and said, well, I've been hit with penalties for similar things I've done this season. So sorry, Carlos. Almost a case of, take it on the chin, mate. It's what happens. It's the regulations. You just got to deal with it.
Despite that, racing incident in my eyes. Before we carry on with the final two questions, just to let our viewers know that over at Racing News 365, we are still running a prize giveaway. If you'd like to win a replica Ayrton Senna helmet, let me get my words right, all you've got to do is head on over to our Instagram page, racingnews365.com, where there is a tagged post with all the information on how to be in the chance of winning it. The competition will continue until September the 7th, which is the day of the Italian Grand Prix. So best of luck. It looks awesome. And yeah, hopefully you get to win the prize. Next question, and it comes from Barry and Ian. This one comes to you, being our man in the paddock. How long does it take for a team to pack everything up and leave after a race?
Great question. I like it. Again, somebody that's really interested in the behind the scenes kind of aspect that goes into Formula One, because it's one of those things that you don't really get to know about or appreciate. We predominantly only see the on-track stuff, whereas behind the scenes there is one hell of a lot of work that goes on. And basically, pretty much as soon as a race has ended, and you can testify to this, Nick, because there's been many a F1 update video that we've conducted post-Grand Prix, and I've shown shots of the pack-up going on behind me. Pretty much as soon as the checker flag comes down, sometimes even beforehand, depending on the number of sponsors, the number of paddock guests that have been invited by the teams, they will start dismantling those lovely paddock buildings that you've seen on your TV shots over the years. And it's a body of work that carries on throughout that particular night. By the following morning, or certainly the early hours of the morning, you're going to get the first trucks that are leaving the circuit with some of that, with not only the cars, but the stuff that's in the garages as well, against the equipment that you don't really see. And then the paddock motorhomes themselves ordinarily are following on that Monday, then being transported. So say, for argument's sake, this particular week, on Sunday night, paddock shut down straight away, and then everything will be transported on Monday, overnight Monday into Tuesday, and they will start probably tomorrow. Where are we, Nick, when we're doing this one?
This is being recorded on Monday. So Monday, the 1st of September is being recorded.
Going live on
Tuesday.
Tomorrow morning, going into Tuesday, they will then start to construct them again ahead of this weekend's event in Monza. So it literally is about a 24-hour turnaround, and some of the big buildings like Red Bull's Palace that you see in the paddock, that can take a little bit longer. So for the big teams, the big paddock buildings, it can take that a little bit longer, but for the most part, it's going to be around 24 hours from starting to deconstruct to then packing up, complete pack up, and on the way in the trucks.
Also,
interesting.
Just to add to that as well, you get support races on a lot of these weekends as well. Because of how early those support races are, they are packed up, gone onto the next event, sometimes a couple of hours before the Grand Prix has even started. So that's how quick, kind of the support paddocks are also doing it. So it is an instant kind of, let's get it all shut down, moved on to the next event.
The final question for this video comes from Eric and Sam. This one comes to you. Isack Hadjar, of course, claimed his first F1 podium at Zandvoort. Hasn't that already triggered a swap with Yuki at Red Bull for this year? Thoughts?
No is the answer. Not yet, at least.
For now.
But Red Bull have maintained that Yuki will have that seat until at least the end of the season. So it's not even something that we would anticipate. As for whether or not it's merited, that is obviously a more subjective area of the question, and it's a good conversation. It's an interesting debate because of how much not even Isack, but also Liam has outperformed Yuki over the last 13 rounds since that swap was made between Yuki and Liam for Japan. But ultimately, I don't think it is the right call to make that switch because you need to give Isack as much time to bed in. I don't see an advantage of putting him in the Red Bull and potentially costing him confidence, costing him development. upping the expectation and the pressure and all the spotlight that is on him, I don't see where the advantage is for Red Bull in that sense. So you kind of look at next season as what will they do? And I think that's where the 2026 into 2026 winter is when they're most likely going to make a change if they will. Even then, I'd argue it's too early for Isack. Yes, he had a brilliant result in Zandvoort, and nothing can take away from that. Even the fact that he inherited that podium position, he got himself in position to capitalize on it. So yeah, fully merited in that sense. I still think it would be too early to promote him over the winter. I think more interestingly, Liam, or not more interestingly, but I think Liam could be re-elevated if they do decide to let go of Yuki Tsunoda, because Laurent Mekies is very different from Christian Horner. Might he say, let's give him a new chance in a new car, new era of regulation, potentially more parity in the team, as Ian was talking about on the podcast yesterday. So is that something Red Bull wants to do? And also, yeah, it's for Isack, he is only 15 rounds in. It didn't work with Pierre Gasly. It didn't work with Alex Albon. I don't see any evidence to suggest that it would be different for Isack Hadjar.
And you're on mute, Ian.
Ian's on mute.
That's staying in the cup.
That's going in the cup. So the only saving grace that you could look at for Isack, based on Sam's comments, if he doesn't believe that he should be in the car next year, too young, too inexperienced, give him another season, I can perfectly understand that. As I say, the mitigating factor against that is that it will be a brand new car next season. It's a new power unit, new regulations, chassis regulations, everything that goes around it. It's not going to be a car that's tailor-made to Max as it has been honed over these past few years, given the current regulations that are, obviously we're in the final year of right now. Yeah. So does that lend itself therefore to it being a slightly more of an even playing field with regard to Max and whoever his teammate might be? Yes, of course, Red Bull will put more of its eggs in the particular Max basket because he's their lead guy at the end of the day. He's the guy with the experience. He's the guy that's won them championships. He's the guy that excels in whatever car he is given. But nevertheless, it is an opportunity for Red Bull to have a greater degree of parity between its two drivers rather than the considerable disparity that we have seen with regard to Max's car on one side of the garage and whoever has been his teammate on the other side of the garage over these past 2 years.
But guess what? Only time will tell. And on that note, that brings an end to this week's fan questions video looking back at the Dutch Grand Prix. Please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and Sam, Ian, and I will see you again this weekend for the Italian Grand Prix. See you later.
Take care until then, folks. Thanks for watching and listening.
Thanks for joining us as always.